Welcome back to the U.S. Navy History Podcast. I am Dale, and Christoph is back. Hey,
I'm
buddy.
back. Hey, it's good to be back. Thank you so much for manning the I was going to say the ship. Is that too on the nose? No. Thank you for manning the ship. You always man the ship. I'm first. Good to be back.
Christoph, before we get into this one, settle in. This is a smaller fight than some of the ones we've covered. No battleships duking it out. No thousands of men in the water. But I'm telling you right now, by the end of today's episode, you're going to understand why the Navy gave this single afternoon its own official battle star. You want to get into it?
Okay. Yes, with a lead up like that, how could I not?
Picture this. It's just past dawn on February 20th, 1942. The sea is flat, almost glassy. The kind of Pacific morning that doesn't look like it belongs to a war. Somewhere out there, roughly 350 miles northeast of a Japanese stronghold called Rubol, the aircraft carrier USS Lexington is cutting through that calm water at better than 20 knots. With 4 heavy cruisers and 10 destroyers spread out around her like a steel fence. On her flight deck, plane handlers are running through the same drills they've run 100 times. Below decks, men are eating breakfast, standing watch, writing letters home. It is, by every outward appearance, just another day at sea. Here is what almost none of them know yet. By sundown, one of those men, a 27-year-old lieutenant nobody outside his squadron has ever heard of, is going to become the first American flying ace of World War II.
What? Okay, sorry. I'm excited.
In a battle that lasts about as long as it takes to play one side of a record. And on the other side of that fight, 8, maybe 9 bomber crews are going to take off from an airfield they think is perfectly safe, flying towards a target they don't know is waiting for them. I want you to hold both of those images in your mind at the same time as we go through this, because this episode isn't just about heroism. There's plenty of that. It's about how a handful of minutes on a day that almost nobody remembers ended up rerouting the next several weeks of the entire Pacific War. Small battle, big ripples. That's today. So, let's back up and set the table, because none of this makes sense without understanding just how bad things looked for the United States Navy in February of 1942. 11 weeks earlier, Pearl Harbor. The Japanese had gutted the battle line at Pearl Harbor, and in the weeks since, it had only gotten worse. Japanese forces were moving with a speed that genuinely alarmed American and Australian planners. Throughout the Philippines, through Malaya, through the Dutch East Indies, through Burma, it felt to a lot of people in early 1942 like nothing could slow this advance down. And on January 23rd, less than a month before the events of today's episode, that advance reached Rabaul. Rabaul sat on the island of New Britain, and on paper it was defended by a small Australian garrison called Lark Force. Roughly 1,400 men. The Japanese came ashore with somewhere north of 5,000 troops. Backed by naval and air support the Australians simply had no answer for. It was over in hours. Most of Lark Force scattered into the jungle. Many were captured or killed in the months that followed. Rabaul belonged to Japan. And here's why that mattered so much. Rabaul wasn't just another dot on the map. It had a deep, sheltered harbor with multiple airfields, including one called Vunakanu, that put Japanese air power within easy reach of the Solomon Islands. New Guinea, and this is a part that had Allied planners genuinely worried, the sea lanes running between the United States and Australia. if Japan consolidated at Rabaul, unmolested, the next moves south were not hard to predict. So, Admiral Chester Nimitz, newly installed as commander of the Pacific Fleet, and Vice Admiral Wilson Brown, commanding what was designated Task Force 11, put together a plan. It wasn't subtle. Sail Lexington and her escorts north, get within striking range of Rabaul, and hit it. Carrier aircraft from the air, cruiser guns from the sea. On the morning of February 21st, punch the new occupant in the mouth before he gets comfortable. Which brings us back to that quiet morning of February 20th. Task Force 11 is on its final approach, swinging towards a launch point northeast of Bougainville, the largest island in the Solomon chain, and the last big landmark between the task force and Rabaul itself. Tomorrow, if everything goes to plan, Lexington's planes are in the air over the enemy's harbor. But here's what they did not know. Out there, in that empty-looking ocean, Japanese search planes are already airborne, sweeping wide arcs from Rabaul, looking for exactly the kind of thing that's currently steaming towards them at 20 knots. The element of surprise that this entire plan depends on is a lot more fragile than anyone on Lexington's bridge currently believes. At 10:15 that morning, a young radar operator watching a glowing screen in a darkened compartment is going to see something appear. A contact, bearing 180, 35 miles out. He has no idea what it is yet. Neither do you. But that blip on the screen is the first domino.
I've got so many questions based on your references, so I'm excited to see what's about to happen. And maybe I'll save one of the questions for later when we get to the actual engagement. But 180, that's the direction on the radar screen that they're seeing, right?
Yes.
And what is 0 degrees? Is that due north or due east or something else? Because 180 would be the opposite direction of whatever the point of origin would be. So I'm just trying to understand if they're coming in like from the west, because 0 would be east, or 0 also, it just makes sense, like it seems like it would be north, but it's all point of reference stuff.
So 180 corresponds to the direction of south. 0 and 360 is north, 90 is east, 180 is south, and 270 is west.
So listeners, I took math in high school and college, and 0 was a different direction, so I feel lied to. I feel unprepared for life and this podcast because of those math classes, but I'm willing to adapt to the new reality that is set before me. Thank you, Dale. And so they're coming in from the south. That's interesting. I guess with those sweeps like you're talking about, that's not what I expected, because they're heading north from what I understand. Like Rabaul is in the Solomon Island chain, which is northeast of Australia. And so I would imagine they're coming from the south, and to get planes or contacts south of you, that means they just passed anyway. I'm just trying to get a context of where we're at and what's about to happen. So yes, they see somebody. Man, we're running into names that I have heard before, even in high school. So Nimitz, absolutely. This guy is very capable. And the Lexington, I've actually had the pleasure of visiting, and they have a great installation there. You should check it out, everybody, if you're ever in the neighborhood. It's in Corpus Christi, Texas. And so, yeah, that is quite a ship. And you really get a proper scale of how many planes this thing can carry, how many decks it has, how claustrophobic it can seem if you're not used to it. Like if you're going in from the sunny beach and going down to the third deck, it's very different. And there are guys that were in there operating engines and checking out radar. I guess I don't know exactly where everything was, but they had like a library and a barbershop. They had all these things on the ship, which I guess is, we continue that tradition to this day on ships at sea. But it's just, if you have an opportunity, check out a museum ship just to get an idea of what we're talking about.
Also visited the Lexington, and from my
Oh, no kidding.
experience, she is actually small to what I'm used to as a carrier.
That's interesting because I mean, to someone who was not in the military, it seemed rather large. But I guess the ship you served on specifically was a modern carrier, which would have had to have been much larger because you're dealing with much faster planes and a bigger assortment of them.
And the next time you visit, and anybody who's listening who wants to visit a museum carrier ship, please ask your tour guide for the location of the bowling alley.
Bowling alley? Are you kidding me? Or
W-
is that like the basement of the Alamo where the bike is?
We'll see if your tour guides are up to the task of identifying that particular spoof.
Okay. I gotcha. Okay. Because you had me going because I'm like, if I could think of a sport that would be the worst to play on a moving ship, I think it would be bowling.
Well, actually, on a carrier, carriers are pretty darn stable.
Really? Okay.
The sea will have to be very, very rough for you to feel much of anything.
Yeah, I guess it's pretty massive. And you have what is that called? Like a dampening bit at the bottom? No? Okay. I'm thinking of a skyscraper. You're good.
She's not going to be earthquake protected, no.
Okay. Well, no worries there. The likelihood of earthquake problems on a carrier probably minimal. 10% at most.
So that
At most. Sorry, go ahead.
that radar blip is going to sit there for a minute. So let's use that minute, because before the fight starts, you need to know who's actually on the ship and what they're flying, because both of those things matter more than you'd think. Start with the ship herself, USS Lexington, hull number CV2, nicknamed by her crew the Lady Lex. Was not originally built to be a carrier at all. She started life on the drawing board as a battle cruiser and got converted before completion. Commissioned back in December of 1927. By 1942, she's one of the oldest carriers in the fleet, but she's also one of the only ones the Navy has left that's actually fit to fight. Her commanding officer is Captain Frederick Sherman. He's been her skipper since the summer of 1940, and he is, by every account, a man who believes in carriers the way some men believe in Scripture. Sherman is going to spend this entire episode directing the defense of his ship from that bridge, and by day's end, he's going to earn a Navy Cross for how he does it. Above Sherman in the chain of command is Vice Admiral Wilson Brown, commanding Task Force 11. The Lexington, those 4 heavy cruisers, 10 destroyers, all of it. Brown is the one who greenlit this push towards Rabaul. And riding on Lexington's deck, providing the air cover for this whole operation, is a squadron that frankly doesn't even belong here. That squadron is Fighter Squadron 3, or VF3, commanded by Lieutenant Commander John Thatch. Everybody calls him Jimmy. And VF3's actual home is not the Lexington, it's the USS Saratoga. But on January 11th, 1942, a Japanese submarine put a torpedo into the Saratoga, about 500 miles west of Oahu. She survived, but she was headed for months of repairs. So VF3, Thatch, and his pilots got reassigned. And as it happened, Lexington's own fighter squadron, VF2, was in the process of getting pulled off the ship to trade in their planes, which left an empty fighter slot on Lexington's deck, and VF3 filled it. Now, here's the detail that matters. VF2 was trading in their Brewster's F2A Buffalo fighters. And if you know anything about the Buffalo, you know that's not a tragedy. It's a mercy killing. The Buffalo was already considered obsolete by early 42, underpowered and outclassed. VF3, by contrast, came aboard Lexington already flying the Grumman F4F Wild, a tougher, better armed, more survivable fighter. So, through what amounts to a scheduling accident, Lexington ends up with the better squadron and the better airplane, almost by chance, right before the one day it's going to matter most. Thatch commanded one of VF-3's three six-plane divisions. The other two were led by Lieutenant Commander Donald Lovelace, the squadron's XO, and Lieutenant Noel Taylor, the flight officer. By February 20th, between maintenance issues and the general wear of operating so far from any repair base, VF-3 had only 16 Wildcats it could actually put in the air. 16 fighters to defend one carrier. This far from home, against whatever Rabaul decides to throw at them. And here's the tool they're relying on to give them warning. Lexington carries something called CXAM radar. For 1942, this is genuinely cutting-edge technology. Under good conditions, it can pick up an aircraft contact out to roughly 80 miles.
Wow.
That's the good news. Here's the catch. It cannot tell you how high that contact is flying, and it cannot tell you how many aircraft are actually in it. One blip on that screen could be a single scout plane. It could also be 17 bombers stacked up in formation. The screen doesn't know, and neither do the men reading it. On the morning of February 20th, with that limitation sitting quietly in the background, Task Force 11 launches 6 Douglas SBD Dauntless dive bombers on a long-range search, out to 300 miles ahead of the formation, plus additional SBDs flying a low-level anti-submarine patrol closer to the ships. Standard precautions, routine even. And then at 10:15 in the morning, the CSAM screen lights up. A contact bearing 180, almost due south. Range 35 miles. Nobody on that screen can tell you yet what it is, how big it is, or how high it's flying. Thatch's division is about to find out the hard way.
That's interesting. When you said a range of 80 miles, I'm like, wow, that's plenty of time to get prepared. But then they show up at 35 miles. That's not as great. Quick question about the CSAM, or however you say it. Was it exclusive to planes? Because it seems like that radar would be able to pick up surface contacts also. Like you could see ships potentially with that as well, right?
Not typically. There is surface radar, and then there's air radar.
Got it. Okay, so this was definitely a plane or collection of planes of some sort. That's helpful. Golly, that would have been... That's almost worse. I mean, maybe not. I keep thinking about if there was something, I knew there was something out there, and I knew the distance, but I didn't know how high it was. I didn't know how many there were. That ramps up anxiety, but I guess that's better than nothing, because then if you're spotted or attacked, I mean, the consequences are much more devastating. So it's a step in the right direction. That's good. But yes, I can feel the anxiety building in the crew. So let's figure out what this thing is.
All right, that blimp. Here's what it turns into. Lexington scrambles a 6-plane combat air patrol, and 2 of those Wildcats, under Thatch, get vectored out to take a look. What they find, climbing up through 12,000 feet, is a H-6K4, nicknamed by the Allies Mavis, a 4-engine flying boat, enormous, with a wingspan of over 100 feet and a crew of about 9 men packed inside it. This particular Mavis is being flown by a lieutenant, Sakai Noboro, and about half an hour earlier, he had already done the one thing Task Force 11 could not afford to let him do. He spotted them and radioed it back towards Rabaul. Thatch and his wingman, Ensign Edward Selstrom, chase that Mavis into a rain squall, lose it, find it again skimming low over the water, and at 11:12 they shoot it down, 43 miles from the ship. And I want to sit on that for just a second, because here's the thing nobody puts in the textbook version of this story. There were 9 men on that plane. Most of them weren't gunners. Most of them were navigators, radiomen, mechanics, a flight crew doing exactly what flight crews do, flying a long, boring search pattern over empty ocean. They never got the chance to turn this into a fair fight, because there wasn't going to be one. 2 Wildcats against an unescorted patrol plane isn't a dogfight, it's an execution. And it's also, from the American side, absolutely necessary. Because if that report gets back to Rabaul intact, everything downstream of this moment changes. Both of those things are true at once. That's war. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, and I'm not going to dress it up either. Here's the cruel part. Shooting the Mavis down doesn't undo the radio call it already made. About 30 minutes later, radar picks up a second Mavis. This one flown by Warrant Officer Hayashi Kiyoshi, sent out specifically to confirm, to amplify what the first pilot had already reported. Lieutenant Burt Stanley and his wingman, Ensign Lee Haynes, run this one down too. Set its inboard engine on fire, watch it go into a smoking dive, and it crashes at 12:18. This second crew never gets the transmission out. Doesn't matter. The damage is already done. Lieutenant Sakai Noboru already told Rabaul exactly where the task force is. Now, this is where Admiral Brown has to make a decision. And I want to be straight with you about how hard this one actually is, because it's easy to second guess from a recliner 80 years later.
Oh, yeah.
Brown's entire plan depended on Lexington showing up over Rabaul tomorrow morning as a surprise. That's gone. Rabaul now knows roughly where his task force is, roughly what course it's on, and has had hours, soon to be most of a day, to get aircraft into the air and come looking. Brown has one corridor. Brown has one carrier. One. If he loses the Lexington this early in the war, in February of 1942, it is genuinely difficult to overstate how bad that would be for the entire Pacific Fleet's ability to project any kind of offensive power for the next several months. So Brown makes the call. Scrub the strike. Turn the task force around. Retire to the northeast. Now, here's the honest tension in that decision. On one hand, that's exactly the kind of caution that, multiplied across a dozen commanders and a dozen decisions, can turn a war of attrition into a war of permanent retreat. If everyone always plays it safe, you never actually hit the enemy. On the other hand, Brown isn't wrong about what's at stake. This isn't his career on the line. It's the ship and roughly 3,000 men aboard her. Historians have gone back and forth on whether Brown was too conservative that day. I'll let you and me chew on that as we go, because spoiler, it's going to come back around by the end of this episode in a way that actually vindicates him. But in this moment, on this morning, it's a defensible call made with incomplete information and a ship he cannot afford to lose. So the task force comes about. They're retiring. The strike on Rabaul, the entire reason they just sailed out here, is off. There's a third radar contact around this time too. 80 miles out, that just reverses course and vanishes. Nobody chases it down. Maybe it's nothing. It's not nothing. Because at 18:42 that afternoon, Lexington's radar screen lights up again. And this contact doesn't look like the others. The operators describe it as a jagged V, a shape, a formation, something with structure to it. It flickers, drops off the screen for a few minutes, and then reappears at 1625, bearing west, 47 miles out. Whatever that is, it's not a lone flying boat.
So when you're telling this story, I'm trying to keep it within the context of some of the other episodes we've done. And so February 1942 is before we've had a lot of decisive victories, we meaning the Allies. And so America is really just trying to penetrate different areas in the Pacific with a very finite number of ships, and then also planes and pilots. And we don't have the industrial capacity working at full steam just yet. We don't have the pipeline like really full of replacements, which becomes vital later in the war. And so I think his decision is totally valid and the right one. Of course, we have all this information from both sides, like being able to read what the Japanese military did in this circumstance from their notes. It's easy for us to say, well, of course he should have done this or that, but he didn't have any of that information. In fact, this radar, which was cutting edge at the time, like you're saying, provided some data, but incomplete. And so he had to make a lot of estimations, a lot of suppositions, and took a very cautious path. I do not doubt that helped two things. One, the overall war effort, where they could come in and engage in a battle more effectively. And then two, which I'm sure we're about to hear about because the first ace is about to be, but also for my benefit to be able to tour this ship. Spoiler, this ship survives long enough for me to visit it over 60 years later. So very exciting. It's easy, like you said, to judge the decisions of so far in the future when you have so much more information, but this was the reality that they had to deal with at the time, and I think I guess we'll see how effective that was as the story unfolds.
Spoilers, the Lexington didn't survive. The one that's in Corpus Christi is a different Lexington that was built to replace the original Lexington. Which is why her nickname is the Blue Ghost.
And not the Lady Lex.
Because when the Japanese confirmed her sinking, and all of a sudden a new Lexington appeared, they're like, oh my lord, she's back from the dead.
Oh no, well, I guess...
But that's something in the future.
Okay, I was going to say, I feel bad saying spoiler alert and then saying a lie. It's like, hey guys, this happened. Didn't happen. Thank you for the update on that.
That jagged V on Lexington's radar didn't come out of nowhere. To understand what it actually is, we need to fly backwards along it, all the way back to Rabaul, and back about 5 hours, to right about the time Lieutenant Saki Noboro's flying boat radioed in its report. That report landed on the desk of Rear Admiral A.G. Goto, commanding the 24th Air Flotilla out of Rabaul. Goto had just days earlier gotten a brand new unit to throw at this problem. The 4th Kukotai, commissioned only on February 10th, 10 days before this engagement. Commanding officer on paper was Captain Moritama Kahiro. But the man actually running the air echelon, the guy who's been leading planes into combat, was Lieutenant Commander Taku Ito. And these weren't green crews. They'd been transferred over from the Takayo Kakotai, and they'd already flown combat over the Philippines and the Dutch East Indies. Experienced men flying for a unit that was barely 2 weeks old. Goto gave the order. Launch the 4th Kokotai. Go get that American carrier. One wrinkle. There were no aerial torpedoes available at Rabaul that day. Torpedoes are what you'd really want against a carrier. They didn't have them. So this was going to be a bombs-only strike. 18 G Betty bombers were tapped for the mission. One had a mechanical problem and never got off the ground, leaving 17. At 14:20 in the afternoon, those 17 Bettys lifted off from Vunakanau airfield and turned south towards a 400-mile flight to where the Lexington had been spotted. Now, before we go any further, I need to tell you about this airplane because it matters for everything that's about to happen. The G4M1, Japanese crews called it Hamaki, which just means cigar, because of its fat, rounded fuselage. On paper, this was an extraordinary aircraft. Long range, good speed, considered by a lot of people at the time to be the best land-based naval bomber in the world. But here's the catch, and it's not a small one. To get that range, Mitsubishi's designers stripped out armor plating. They stripped out self-sealing fuel tanks. The wings themselves were basically built around fuel cells, with nothing protecting them. American pilots figured this out fast and gave it a nickname of their own, the Flying Lighter.
Lighter cigar, yeah, it fits.
One-shot lighter. Because that's basically what it was. You hit the wing, and the whole plane could go up like a struck match. I want you to sit with that for a second, because every man climbing into one of those 17 bombers at Vunakanau that afternoon either knew that or was about to find out the hard way. Those aren't faceless silhouettes. The lead, Chutai, was roughly a squadron-sized formation, was 8 planes under Ito himself. His wingman and section leaders included men like Petty Officer First Class Koji Maeda, Petty Officer First Class Susumu Uchiyama, Lieutenant Junior Grade Akira Mitani, leading the second section. Petty Officer Second Class Roj Soki, Petty Officer First Class Ben Mori, and Petty Officer First Class Tokiharo Baba. And in the pilot's seat of Ito's own command plane, flying the man who's leading this whole formation, was Warrant Officer Chozo Waki. The other Chotai, 9 planes, was led by Lieutenant Nakagawa. 2 formations, 17 bombers total, 400 miles of open ocean between them and the Lexington. And here's the thing, they split up. Nakagawa's 9 planes finds the task force first, somewhere around 1600, coming in from one direction. That's the contact Lexington's radar starts tracking as the Jagged V. Thatch and most of VF-3's available fighters scramble to meet them. But Ito's 8 planes are coming from a different angle. And at 16:49, 11 minutes after that first contact, Lexington radar picks up a second formation. 12 miles out, on the side of the ship that's currently undefended, because everybody who can fly is already engaged with Nakagawa's group on the other side. 8 Bettys, 12 miles, and right now, there are exactly 2 American fighters in position to do anything about it.
Oh no! That was my internal monologue as you were saying that. This sounds like a potential disaster. I'm curious though, as far as the Japanese airplanes, dubbed both the cigar and the one-shot lighter, were the vulnerabilities known at this time? Or were yes? Okay.
Oh yeah.
I imagine the Japanese knew very well, because when you're stripping armor and self-sealing fuel tanks, like I was like, how is this thing? Oh yeah, they're stripping everything down and making it riskier with the trade-off of hugely extended range.
That was a
And
conscious
so,
decision. Yes.
yeah. And that happens all the time in life, but in war as well, specifically. Golly, knowing that the wing attached temporarily to the Lexington is so small and they're facing contacts in two different locations, that's not a spot you want to be in. You're undermanned, and this has a potential to be very negative. And so I wonder how much second guessing was happening from the commanders of the Lexington. Like, oh, well, we tried to do this, but it's no matter what we did, it could have been too late, or would a more aggressive stance have prevented this? Or like, you're doing the best you can with the information you have, and I think that's as leaders, as adults, that's the best anybody can do. And so, yeah, I got to hear the rest of this story to find out what happens.
2 fighters. That's what's standing between 8 Japanese bombers and the Lexington's unprotected flank. Let's
Wow.
talk about who these 2 men actually are. One of them you already know, at least by reputation. Lieutenant Edward Butch O'Hare. 27 years old, a Naval Academy graduate assigned to VF-3 since before the war started. He'd actually been put up on patrol that very morning, part of the search effort, though he hadn't found anything. Now he's airborne again, flying a Wildcat with a side number white F-15 painted on it. His wingman is Lieutenant Junior Grade named Marion William Dufilo. Everybody calls him Duff. Both men were part of the last division VF-3 threw into the air that afternoon. The launch order shouted across Lexington's flight deck as the ship heeled over to get wind across her bow, went something like, Thatch in 13, Strom, take 2, O'Hare in 15, Dufilo, 4. That's it. That's the whole squadron now. All 16 operational Wildcat VF-3s has, every single one of them, committed to this fight. Now, before these 2 even reach the enemy, I want to walk you through the math, because the math is the whole story of what's about to happen. Each Wildcat carries 4 Browning 50 caliber machine gun. Each gun holds 450 rounds. Do the arithmetic on that rate of fire. And what you get is this, roughly 34 seconds. That's it. That's the entire offensive capacity of one Wildcat, expressed in time. 34 seconds of bullets. And then you're an unarmed airplane in a combat zone. Now, look at what's on the other side of this intercept. Each G4M1 Betty, remember the flying lighter? All that exposed fuel and no armor, carries a 20 millimeter cannon in its tail. 1 cannon per bomber, covering the rear approach. 8 bombers flying in tight formation means 8 overlapping fields of fire covering each other's tail. It's like trying to walk up behind a porcupine that's facing every direction at once. O'Hare has already worked out in his head a way around this. A high side diving attack, coming down at an angle that kept him outside the cone where the tail cannon could track him. Deflection shooting. It's a technique, not a guarantee, but it's the only card he's got to play. Here's where things stand at 1649. Lexington's radar lights up again. A new contact, only 12 nautical miles out. That, and critically, it's on the side of the task force that isn't currently engaged. Everyone's attention, every available Wildcat, is over on the other side of the ship, dealing with the first wave. 7 fighters are out there chasing the remnants of that group in the opposite direction. 5 more are orbiting close to the carrier, running low on fuel, waiting for a chance to land. That leaves O'Hare and Dufilo. They're vectored towards the new contact. And at around 5 o'clock, or 1700, they spot it. 8 Mitsubishi Bettys locked in a tight V formation, 9 miles out from the ship, with O'Hare and Dufilo sitting 1,500 feet above them. Tactically, that's actually a decent position. Altitude is everything in a diving attack. 2 Wildcats, 8 bombers. Bad odds, but not impossible. 2 guns working in coordination, attacking from altitude, picking off the edges of the formation. That's a survivable fight. That's a fight VF3 has trained for. So they roll in, both of them, diving down out of that 1,500-foot perch towards the formation below. And then, nothing. Dufilo squeezes his trigger, and nothing happens.
No!
All 4 guns jammed simultaneously, just dead. No warning, no partial malfunction he can clear in a few seconds. Completely silent guns on a man diving towards 8 enemy bombers. And I want to stop here for a second. Because I think it's worth sitting with what that moment actually was for Dufilo. He's not pulling away because he's scared. He's not failing at anything. His airplane simply stopped being a weapon mid-dive with 0 notice. Now, he's a target with a propeller on it. Nothing more. And for the rest of this engagement, Dufilo is going to be exactly that. A man flying a useless airplane through a battle he cannot affect, watching. I'll tell you now, Dufilo survives this day. He does not survive the war. He's killed 5 months later over Guadalcanal, and he gets a posthumous Navy Cross for it. But on this afternoon, in this moment, he's just along for the ride. Which means it's down to 1 man, 1 Wildcat, 8 bombers in a mutually protecting V formation with overlapping tail cannons. 9 miles from the only carrier the U.S. Navy has in this entire ocean. O'Hare doesn't break off. He commits to the dive.
Oh, that has to be one of the worst feelings as a trained pilot, I think, is know the odds they're not great. 2 guys against, did you say 8 or 9 bombers?
8.
8. And huge tail guns. As soon as you said how big those guns were, that's instant death if you get anywhere behind those planes. And so you have to plan, coordinate, and that's what they did. And mid-dive, you find out that all of your guns are ineffective. What a horrible feeling. Not only that you have very little in the way of being able to take out the enemy, but that you've already committed to a dive that is very difficult to get out of. And all that training, all that potential that you have to do something to make a difference is nullified because of just an ineffective tool. And that's got to be very gut-wrenching. And I'm sure Butch O'Hare over here is not crazy about that either, but again, you've got to do what you've got to do. You have a plan, you're committing to the plan, you execute the plan until things change and you need to make a new plan. And so this is, golly, the odds are so stacked against Mr. O'Hare. But the little that I know about him, having flown through Chicago's O'Hare Airport, I think this is going to go well.
4 minutes. What I'm about to walk you through took less time than it'll take me to tell it to you. Less time than a commercial break. Hold on to that. O'Hare rolls in from above and to the right of the formation. A high side diving attack. The technique he'd worked out to stay clear of those tail cannons. His first target is the outside bomber in the formation, flown by Petty Officer Second Class Rosuke Kigoku. O'Hare's first burst tears into Kogiku's right engine and wing fuel tank. Exactly the kind of hit that on this airplane, the flying lighter, should mean the end. The bomber lurches violently to starboard, out of formation, but it doesn't explode, doesn't go down. Damaged, badly, but still flying. O'Hare doesn't wait to find out what happens to it. He's already sliding to the next plane in line, flown by Petty Officer First Class Koji Maeda. Another burst. Maeda's plane skids violently in midair. Rounds clearly finding their mark, but again, it holds together. 2 bombers hit, 2 bombers damaged, 0 bombers down. Roughly 15 seconds of his 34 have just been sent, and the scoreboard reads 0. He keeps moving. His next target is Petty Officer First Class Sosumo Uchiyama, flying on the left wing of the 1st Shotai, the lead section of the formation. O'Hare's burst catches Uchiyama's plane in the left wing and engine. This time, there's no ambiguity. The engine flares, seizes, and the bomber peels hard left and drops into a dive it's not coming out of. That's kill number 1. Confirmed. And here's the moment I want you to sit on for a second. Because right now, this very instant, 5 Bettys are still in formation, still on course, and they're at their bomb release point. 10 250-kilogram bombs come off those racks and fall towards the Lexington. The ship is maneuvering hard, and every one of those 10 bombs misses. The closest one lands.
Oh my gosh. That's. Oof.
The closest one lands about 100 feet off the hull. Close enough that men on the deck would have felt it, heard it, maybe gotten wet from the spray. But it misses. All 10 miss. O'Hare's not done. He swings back around, this time coming in from the port side, the left, for another pass. And this time, his guns find Lieutenant Junior Grade Akira Mitani, leader of the 2nd Shotai. Matani's plane goes down burning. Kill number 2. Now, here's where things get almost surgical. With Mitani gone, the formation's lead plane, the command aircraft flown by Lieutenant Commander Tukozu Ito himself, is suddenly sitting there, exposed, with nothing covering it anymore. O'Hare closes to what witnesses describe as point-blank range and puts a sustained burst into Ito's port engine. The entire engine nacelle, the housing around the engine itself, tears completely free of the wing and falls away from the aircraft. The explosion that follows is so violent that the other pilots in the 1st Chutai, watching from their own cockpits, are convinced the commander's plane had just taken a direct hit from anti-aircraft fire from the ships below. They don't know, not yet, that it was one Wildcat. Ito's plane, with a gaping hole torn in its left wing, falls out of formation. That's kill number 3. O'Hare makes one more pass, a 4th, likely against Maeda. Again, the man he's damaged in the very first attack. And somewhere in the middle of that burst, his guns simply stop. Out of ammunition. 34 seconds, used to the last round. He's done everything he could possibly do with what he was carrying. He pulls off hard, clearing the airspace so the ships below can finally bring their own anti-aircraft guns to bear on whatever's left. In the space of about 4 minutes, O'Hare has put 3 bombers into the water and badly damaged at least 2 more. 4 Bettys are still inbound towards the Lexington, but they're flying with whatever ordnance they came with, untouched by anything O'Hare did to them. And then there's Ito's plane, the one with the engine torn off, the one with the hole in its wing. It should be finished. By every reasonable measure, it should be falling into the sea right now. It's not. Somehow it's still flying. And the man now at the controls, Warrant Officer Chuzo Watanabe, is leveling it out. And he's turning towards the Lexington.
That's got to be a couple of miracles in a row. Number 1, having 10 bombs miss the Lexington is one of them. But I think on the Japanese side, having that engine fall clear of the plane prior to explosion, that has to be extremely lucky. Like, if that would have ignited and exploded while in formation. The violence of that explosion may have knocked out multiple planes, not just the one that it was attached to. What a feeling of you're out of ammo. You've done what you could. The threat is still there. And yeah, like you said, the ship can see the bombers, can do something. I'm sure there's anti-aircraft flak that's about to go into the air. And so as O'Hare, you have to make a decision. Do I stick around while the air gets full of flak around me and potentially go down as well amongst these volatile planes, or not? Like, what else can I do to make sure my mates are good, like they are safe? And 3 confirmed kills, that's significant, but it takes 5 to be an ace. I know that much. And so I'm curious what happens next for him to be able to accomplish that feat.
Watanabe is turning his crippled plane towards the Lexington. And before I tell you what happens next, I need to give you a word, because this word is going to matter for the rest of the war. And this, right here, February 20th, 1942, is the first time anybody on the American side ever sees it happen. The word is Ti'atari. It means body crashing. It's the deliberate act of flying your aircraft into an enemy target when you know you're not making it home anyway. Most people, when they hear about Japanese aircraft deliberately crashing into American ships, think of 1944, 1945, the kamikaze campaigns late in the war, the organized squadrons, the whole grim doctrine built around it. But that doctrine didn't spring out of nowhere. It has roots. And one of those roots is right here in February of 1942, less than 3 months into the war, when, according to the Navy's own official histories, not 1, but 2 Japanese bombers attempted to crash themselves into the Lexington that afternoon. Watanabe, flying Ito's shot-up command plane, engine torn loose, wing holed, levels out and comes in towards the ship. Whether this was a deliberate decision born in the seconds after his commander's plane was savaged, or simply a dying airplane drifting towards the largest object in the ocean, we can't know for certain. But the Navy's records describe it as an attempted crash dive. It misses. At 17:12, Watanabe's plane goes into the water near the Lexington, close enough that it's recorded almost to the minute. And he's not the only one. A second Betty, apparently somewhere else in this engagement, also makes what's recorded as a deliberate run at the ship. It also misses. 2 attempts, 2 misses. Lexington comes through this entire afternoon. Radar contacts, dogfights, bomb runs, suicide dives, without a single hit on her hull. Not one. Now, all this is happening inside an absolute storm of anti-aircraft fire. Every gun the Lexington and her escorts can bring to bear is firing at bombers, at anything that looks like it's diving towards a ship. Sometimes at things that weren't bombers at all. And that brings us to O'Hare. He's out of ammunition. He's pulled off from the fight. He's coming back around to land on the Lexington, the very ship he just spent 4 minutes single-handedly protecting. And he's on his approach with his wheels down. One of the ship's own 50 caliber gunners opens up on him. Friendly fire. The young sailor's aim is bad enough that O'Hare doesn't take a single hit from it. In fact, by the end of this whole engagement, his Wildcat has exactly 1 bullet hole in it, total, from everything that's happened today. After he lands, O'Hare reportedly walks over to the gunner, a kid who's clearly mortified, and in classic O'Hare's fashion, makes a joke of it rather than chewing him out. It's a small moment, but I think it tells you something about the man. Meanwhile, out on the edge of this whole engagement, there's one more piece of business. Remember Bien Maury, the pilot whose plane O'Hare damaged early in the attack, forcing him to dump his bombs and break off? Maury is now trying to do the only sensible thing left to him. Get away. Run for Rabaul. and Lieutenant Noel Gaylor, who you'll remember led VF-3's 3rd Division, catches up to him about 40 miles out from the Lexington and shoots him down. I want to be honest with you about that one because I think it's the kind of thing that gets glossed over in triumphant version of this story. Maury wasn't attacking anything anymore. He'd dumped his bombs. He was running. And he got run down and killed 40 miles away from the fight anyway. That's not a war crime. Pursuing a fleeing enemy aircraft in an active combat zone is entirely within the laws of war. And letting him go could mean he comes back tomorrow with another load of bombs. But it's also not glorious. It's just what war is. A man trying to survive, killed anyway, because the side that's winning doesn't have to be merciful to keep winning. And on the American side, the cost of this afternoon had a name too. Ensign John W. Wilson, one of 2 VF-3 Wildcats lost to enemy fire during this engagement. I don't have much more to tell you about him. The records are thin. But I'm not going to let this episode pass without saying his name. Because somewhere back in the States, in February of 1942, there was a family that got a telegram about a son who didn't come home from a battle most Americans have never heard of. By the time the skies finally go quiet, the Lexington is undamaged. Not one bomb hit her. Not one Ta'atari connected. 15 of the 17 bombers that left Vuno Konau this afternoon are not going home. And 400 miles away at Rabaul, somebody's about to get the worst phone call of their career.
That is incredible. So I'm trying to put myself in the position of the Japanese commander that issued the command to send these bombers out based on the limited information that was radioed earlier. It's like, oh, here's the position. Sending all these planes should be sufficient. And then when you find out that only 2 return, and I'm guessing the information is, yeah, we didn't even scratch. We didn't put a scratch on that ship at all. And the planes took us down, the anti-aircraft took us down, like basically a recounting of the entire event. That has to be demoralizing, I'm sure, to the Japanese, like an underestimation. Not really an underestimation. That's the thing I can't get over. It's based on what America had, that should have been sufficient to take out that ship. Like really, one lucky bomb could have taken out that entire carrier. But they all missed. And then the 2 planes that are attempting to fly into the ship, they both miss. That's an immense amount of luck. And combined with the actions that helped to mitigate disaster. Like we mentioned in earlier episodes, the ship has some capability of trying to maneuver to get away from a bomb, because a bomb is usually dropped from way up there, and you have time to kind of get out of the way as best you can, and they were able to. I really have to hand it to O'Hare also to make a joke about almost getting shot out of the sky. Like, you fight all these bombers, you run out of ammo, and you're doing your best to survive. You're landing, and then your own ship is shooting at you. That's frustrating. But it's like, hey, thanks for trying to keep the skies clear, I guess. You know what I mean? What a guy. That is amazing. That could have gone south, and I'm sure that helped to make that sailor better. You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't have to live with the shame of almost shooting down this incredible pilot. The pilot knows what he was trying to do, and because they were able to, I guess, process that together, he can go on without that monkey on his back. You know what I mean? That's great. That's incredible. What a day.
I disagree with you there. That monkey's going to be on his back forever. It's just,
you think so?
Didn't turn into, I killed one of my own guys.
Well, I think had O'Hare reacted differently, had he come up angry, slapped him or punched him or whatever, then he would have carried that a lot longer. But the fact that he joked with him and was able to kind of make light of it, I think that significantly aided him in the ability, and this is just based on what I've personally observed in others and myself, as far as how you make a huge mistake and how that's handled by the person that you have impacted, how that can get resolved better. And you know what? I don't know what ended up happening to this sailor. You did mention the Lexington sinks, so it could be a disaster for him, but that is the best possible outcome for him after making that mistake, I think, versus killing O'Hare or having a vendetta against him by O'Hare or something. Friendly fire sucks, and there have been many a conflict where that has happened. And it's one of those realities of war that you have to kind of accept as a potential. And O'Hare did. And I think that was magnanimous of him. Like, it really showed, I understand what the risks are as a pilot, even from the confusion of my own side. And I'm willing to move forward and support my team.
Well, sure, O'Hare didn't chew him out, but I guarantee you he
Oh,
was chewed
yeah.
out.
Right. That I think the commanders have to for that.
And he probably also got a lot of flack. We'll use flack instead of
Right.
a more naval term
Right.
from his shipmates.
I imagine so. Probably got a fun nickname.
Probably some corrective action, too.
Yeah, I can see that. And maybe a reassignment. It's like, hey, when battle stations come up, you're doing something different.
You're now loader, not shooter.
Right. Yeah, you're right. This is something I haven't learned about specifically in history class in school. But the name O'Hare, absolutely famous. Like, there was even a short-lived animated series called Bucky O'Hare about an ace pilot who was also an anthropomorphic rabbit. Look it up. And it's based on Butch O'Hare.
Somewhere at Rabaul that evening, somebody has to write up the numbers from this operation. 17 bombers launched. 15 didn't come back. A brand new air group, commissioned barely 10 days earlier, gutted in a single afternoon by what amounts to one squadron of Wildcats, and for about 4 minutes, one man. Let's zoom all the way back out now, because I told you back earlier in the episode that Admiral Brown's decision to abort the Rabaul raid was going to come back around. And here's where it does. Remember, Brown's entire plan had been to hit Rabaul by surprise on the 21st. That plan is dead. Permanently buried. Davy Jones's locker sunk to the bottom. Lexington and her escorts are retiring, and that strike never happens. Not this way, not on this schedule. If you're scoring this purely on did the mission succeed, February 20th looks like a failure. The objective wasn't met. But here's the thing. Because Brown turned his task force around when he did, because he prioritized keeping the Lexington intact over pressing a compromised raid, the ship that absorbed everything the 4th Kukotai could throw at it that afternoon was a fully intact, fully fueled, fully armed aircraft carrier with 16 Wildcats ready to fly. If Brown had pushed on towards Rabaul as originally planned, this engagement might have happened closer to the Japanese airfields, with less warning, against a larger strike, with the Lexington already committed to launching her own air group. The cautious decision from earlier is the reason there was a fight to win. I told you it'd come back around. Now, what does losing 15 bombers in one afternoon actually cost the Japanese strategically? This is where it gets interesting. The 4th Kokutai was supposed to be part of the air support for the next move south, an invasion of the towns of Leh and Salamua on the northeastern coast of New Guinea, originally planned for around March 3rd. With their bomber strength gutted, the Japanese commander responsible for that operation had to push the timeline back. The new target date became March 8th. 5 days. That's the entire delay. 5 days. Caused by one bad afternoon off Bougainville. Under normal circumstances, 5 days is nothing. A rounding error. But these were not normal circumstances, because while the Japanese were licking their wounds and rescheduling, the Lexington's task force linked up with the USS Yorktown, forming a combined 2-carrier force. And on March 7th, Royal Australian Air Force reconnaissance planes spotted exactly what everyone had been waiting for: a Japanese invasion convoy sitting in Huon Gulf, getting ready to land troops at Lae and Salamaua. The landings happened on March 8th, basically unopposed. There was only a small Australian garrison there, and it withdrew. But now there's a window. The Japanese troops are going to be sitting in those harbors, unloading troops and equipment, vulnerable for days. On March 10th, Lexington and Yorktown launched their aircraft from the Gulf of Papa. And this time, there's no warning at all. The American planes fly up over the Owen-Stanley mountain range, 120 miles completely out of sight of any Japanese patrol plane. It's the mirror image of February 20th. This time, the Americans are the ones nobody sees coming. Lexington dive bombers hit Lae at 9:22 in the morning. Her torpedo planes and more dive bombers hit Salamaua 16 minutes later. Yorktown's air group follows up half an hour after that. By the time it's over, 3 Japanese transport troops, the Koen Go Maru, the Koku Hanma Maru, and the Tenyo Maru, are sunk. Roughly 130 Japanese sailors and soldiers are killed, with another 250 wounded. American losses for the entire raid: 1 SBD Dauntless lost to anti-aircraft fire. Now, hold both of those days in your hands at the same time, the way I asked you back in the beginning. February 20th, a defensive battle, fought to protect 1 carrier, that nobody on the American side actually won in terms of the original mission. March 10th, an offensive strike against an exposed invasion fleet that inflicted real damage on an active Japanese operations. These aren't 2 separate stories. They're the same story. The 5-day gap, the 4th Kukutai's losses brought the Americans, is the exact gap that put a Japanese invasion convoy in the crosshairs at the worst possible moment for them. That's the ripple effect. 4 minutes of dogfighting off Bougainville, and 3 weeks later, 3 ships go to the bottom of Huon Gulf. And in the middle of it, the 4 minutes that started this whole chain, was one 27-year-old lieutenant who, by the time any of this New Guinea fighting happened, was already on his way home to become the most famous face in the United States Navy.
That it's important to understand the fuller context, and I appreciate that you're doing that. I think it's always interesting to look at the details of how a battle goes, the numbers of losses on each side, or how things transpire, how things could have gone, but how the decision that was made became something else completely really provides context for how the overall effort is demonstrated in the arc of the entire war. And yeah, it is interesting how a delay of, like you said, 5 days could mean nothing, but in this circumstance means everything because of what happens in those 5 days. And it's astonishing. I'm still thinking about the battle as you described it and visualizing crippled bombers trying to crash into the Lexington and missing. And if any, just a little bit differently, it would have been over for that ship. And they would have been very far from any support had that ship started to sink. And you think about the material that would have been lost, the lives that would have been lost, and how the effort would have been hindered. But you admittedly, there are other battles where the Allies don't fare as well. They get crushed, and that sometimes has to do with luck on the Japanese side as well. And that's just the way things go. But taking advantage of opportunities when they come up and then pressing forward and just like, all right, this is the new reality. Let's make decisions based on what just happened. It's so vital to keep pushing forward in spite of what happens, win or lose. And that's what I consistently see in the stories that you tell. Like when you recount these encounters, they're not great. Like the situations are pretty tense, they're pretty horrible, but decisions have to be made. They are made, and for better or worse, you adapt and move forward. And I think that's ultimately what helps win wars.
So there he is, 28 years old now, the most famous fighter pilot in America, heading home. But if you want to understand what that moment actually meant, not just to the country, but to him personally, you have to go back further than February 20th, 1942. You have to go back to his father. Edward Joseph O'Hare, everybody called him Easy Eddie, was a lawyer, first in St. Louis, then in Chicago. And in Chicago, Eddie O'Hare went into business with Al Capone, specifically the dog racing and wire service rackets. Capone's gambling empire needed exactly the kind of legal mind Eddie had, and Eddie made a fortune providing it. I want to be straightforward about this. Butch O'Hare's father got rich working for one of the most notorious organized crime figures in American history. That's just true. But then, and this is the part that's been told and retold so many times, it's picked up some extra polish along the way. Eddie O'Hare turned. He became an informant for federal investigators, and the information he provided helped put Al Capone away on tax evasion charges in 1931. Family lore holds that part of why he did it was for Butch. After having a father with a federal informant's resume, rather than a mob lawyer's, was going to matter when his son applied to the Naval Academy. Whether that's the whole truth or a story that got cleaner with each retelling, I can't tell you for certain. Historians flag parts of it as embellishment, but the core of it is documented fact. Eddie O'Hare helped convict Capone, and Capone's people knew it. On November 8th, 1939, a week before Capone walked out of Alcatraz, a free man, Eddie O'Hare was shot to death while driving through Chicago. Nobody was ever charged. Butch came home for the funeral. Now, hold that image next to this one. April 21st, 1942. The White House. President Roosevelt standing in front of Butch O'Hare, while Butch's wife Rita drapes the Medal of Honor around his neck. Roosevelt promotes him 2 full ranks on the spot to lieutenant commander. 4 days later, St. Louis throws him a parade. 60,000 people lining the streets for a man who, 3 years earlier, had buried a father gunned down in the street over a debt to organized crime. I'm not going to tell you that one event erases the other, because that's not how families or history actually work. But I think it's worth sitting with the question honestly. Did Butch's heroism redeem his father's name in the eyes of the country? A lot of people at the time clearly felt that way. Is that fair to either of them? I don't have a clean answer. I just think it's a real question, and it's the one this family lived with, not an abstraction. Now, here's something that doesn't get talked about nearly enough. Butch O'Hare didn't sit out the rest of the war as a poster boy. After the bond tours, after the training command, he went back to combat. August 1943, aboard the light carrier USS Independence, flying with VF-6, he's in the strike on Marcus Island, October 5th, Wake Island. He personally shoots down an enemy aircraft, and his squadron accounts for 7 more. Second Navy Cross. By late 1943, he's commander Air Group 6 CAG aboard USS Enterprise. And then comes November 26, 1943, off Turawa in the Gilbert Islands. Japanese Betty bombers are making night torpedo runs at the American carriers, and nobody has ever tried to fight them off in the dark from a carrier deck before. O'Hare volunteers to lead the experiment. A mixed section, radar-equipped TBF Avenger torpedo bombers paired with his F-6F Hellcats, hunting in total darkness. They called it the Black Panthers. O'Hare's Hellcat never came back.
I think that is a testament to the type of person that Butch was, based on the information you've conveyed as well as some information I've just gathered over the years. Knowing that he's not one to rest on his laurels, he could have been stateside for the rest of the war and coordinated things and just been far from the action, but he did not choose to do that, in spite of his rank. And I think I've met a handful of people that are that way, that they have a drive, and they will not accept promotion or an elevation of some sort and then be pulled away from the thing that their heart desires to engage in. There's someone on my wife's family that had the opportunity to be promoted several times within his company, but he chooses not to because he's like, one, the politics are stupid, and two, I want to be close to like the ground level to see, like, I want to be where the action is. And he chooses to do that, and I respect that. It's interesting to see when people turn down what society would view as a good and noble thing to pursue what they want to do in spite of all the accolades and everything. And I think Butch O'Hare is one of those guys. It's a pity we lost him, but I think, again, you can go through the Chicago O'Hare Airport, and I can't remember which terminal it is, but there is a statue dedicated to him based on his accomplishments. And yeah, based on the folks I've talked to that have been in Chicago for a long time, that man absolutely redeemed his father. I mean, I'm sure if you work for Al Capone and then you snitch on Al Capone, there are many people that would view both of those things as bad. It's like, well, if you're going to work for him, have integrity, don't be a snitch. And but that was all made up for with the bravery and the dedication that Butch O'Hare showed, and I think that's significant.
Well, yeah, Christoph, let's close this one out, shall we?
Yeah, let's do it.
O'Hare's Hellcat never came back from Turawa that night. A search at dawn found nothing. A PBY Catalina searched again 3 days later. Nothing. On November 29th, 1943, the Navy listed Edward Butch O'Hare as missing in action. A year later, he was declared dead. His body was never recovered. He received a posthumous Navy Cross, his third, and the Navy named a destroyer after him, the USS O'Hare, and his mother sponsored its launching. And in 1949, Chicago renamed its airport in his honor, as you have mentioned many, many, many times.
I don't think it was that many.
Every single day, tens of thousands of people walk through O'Hare International, and almost none of them know why it's called that. Now, what did all this actually change? Here's the chain, laid all the way out. The 4th Kikotai lost 15 of 17 bombers on February 20th. That forced a 5-day delay in the Japanese landings at Lae. That delay put a Japanese invasion convoy in exactly the wrong place on March 10th, when Lexington and Yorktown caught them and sank 3 transports. And the United States Navy thought enough of that whole chain, starting with this one afternoon, to put action off Bougainville on its official list of World War II battle stars. That's not a participation medal. That's the Navy looking back from later in the war saying, this one mattered. There's a second legacy here too, and it's a quieter one. After this engagement, Lieutenant Commander Jimmy Thatch kept working on a defensive fighter tactic he's been developing, something that would let outnumbered, outperformed American fighters survive against more maneuverable Japanese aircraft. He tested it with VF 3. And in those test flights, the pilot flying as the enemy, trying to find a way through Thatch's formation, was Butch O'Hare. He couldn't do it. The tactic worked. It became known as the Thatch Weave, and it would save American lives for the rest of the Pacific War. Thatch later developed the Big Blue Blanket against kamikazes and retired a full admiral. So in a strange way, O'Hare's fingerprints are on two different legacies from this period. The 4 minutes that made him famous, and the tactic he unknowingly helped prove just by failing to beat it. And there's one more thing worth sitting with. The USS Lexington, the ship O'Hare's actions likely saved from, in Admiral Brown's and Captain Sherman's own words, serious damage or even loss, was sunk less than 3 months later at the Battle of the Coral Sea, after taking 2 torpedoes and 2 bombs. Told you.
Yeah, you did.
Does that make February 20th meaningless? I don't think so. It bought the Lexington 3 more months of service at a moment in the war when every single day of carrier availability mattered enormously. Nothing in this war was permanent, but timing was everything, and this battle bought time. So why don't more people know about this one? Simple. It's sandwiched. 11 weeks after Pearl Harbor, 3.5 months before Midway, 2.5 months before Coral Sea. Everything around it is bigger, louder, more decisive sounding, but the Navy itself didn't see it that way, and I don't think we should either. Now, before Christoph takes us out, I want to do what this show always tries to do. Name some names. On the American side, Ensign John W. Wilson of Fighting Squadron 3 killed defending the Lexington. One name, one life, one family, they got a telegram. On the Japanese side, Lieutenant Commander Tukozi Yato, commanding officer of the 4th Kokutais, 1st Chuntai, and warrant officer Chozu Watanabe, the pilot flying Ito's plane in its final moments. They went into the sea together. Petty Officer First Class Sosomo Ochiyama and Lieutenant Junior Grade Akira Mi, each leading their own sections, each shot down doing exactly what they've been trained in order to do. And beyond those names, roughly 130 Japanese sailors and airmen in total didn't come home from this one day. That includes the crews of those 2 Kawanishi Mavis flying boats from that morning. 9 men apiece, most of whom have no names in any record I could find. Reconnaissance crews doing their jobs, gone. Different uniforms, different flags, same arithmetic in the end.
All right. Well, I think that is a very good summary and a good place for us to conclude. Hey, why don't I take us out? Ladies and gentlemen and people of all ages, thank you so much for listening to us. I hope you learned something. I sincerely say that every time. I learned something each episode, and I hope you did too. And I hope you enjoy coming back to learn more about conflict, the war, humanity, and the various aspects that go into that. If you ever want to get a hold of us, maybe you know something about this battle because of a relative you had on the Lexington. You should reach out to us. The email address you can reach us at is usnavyhistorypodcast@gmail.com. Alternatively, we are on X Twitter with the handle @NHistoryPod. If that wasn't enough, we also have a Discord server. That's right, a Discord server. In the show notes, you'll find the link. You can join the server. You can talk to us, other fans. You can listen to what they have to say. Engage in robust debate. All that stuff. It's great. And so please, you're welcome to join at any time. Also, we talk about the numbers before we start recording every time. And we see who's listening and from where, and it's just always so encouraging to know that y'all are out there and invested in the show. So thank you. Please, if you find this content interesting, feel free to tell a friend, coworker, family member that would like it. And you have my appreciation. Thank you so much.
And with that, we're going to wish you guys fair winds and following seas. Goodbye.
Bye, everyone.